I came off the boat after 23 days and pulled into my own driveway expecting to see my wife in the garden. What I found was tomatoes split open on the ground, basil gone to seed, and a house that smelled like nobody had opened a window in a month. She was sitting on the edge of the daybed in the back room with her hands folded, crying without making any sound at all. 41 years of marriage, and I had seen that woman cry maybe 5 times. Her hands were ice cold in a 74-degree house. I want to tell you the whole thing, and I want you to stay for the last part especially, because what my wife did while she was alone in that house is the reason any of the rest of it happened. Before I start, tell me down in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I read them. My name is Arend Bosma. Everybody's called me Arnie since I was 6. I'm 68 and I live outside Traverse City, Michigan, on the old Mission Peninsula, about 400 yards off the water. I was a marine engineer for 31 years. Great Lakes. 1,000-footers hauling taconite out of 2 harbors down to the mills, and stone and coal and whatever else. 15 years as second, 11 as chief. Now, people hear engineer and they picture a man with a wrench. That's about 10% of it. What I actually did, every single watch, for 31 years, was write things down. Temperatures, pressures, bearing temps, fuel differentials, cooling water in, cooling water out, every 4 hours, in a book, in pen. And here's the thing about that, and it is the whole reason I'm telling you this story. Not one of those numbers ever means anything by itself. Code. A bearing at 141 degrees is fine. It's fine every time. You could look at that number for the rest of your life and never once be alarmed by it. But a bearing that was 122 on Monday, and 131 on Wednesday, and 141 on Friday, is a bearing that is going to seize, and if you wait for a noise, you have already lost the engine. You do not read the number. You read the Timline Tim. That's the job. 31 years of it. And I want you to hold on to it because it's going to come back around and take a piece out of me before this is over. My wife is Marley's. We were married in 1984 at the Little Reformed Church in Elk Rapids. She's 66. She walked 2 miles every morning of her adult life, and up until this happened, she could pick up a 50-pound bag of soil off the ground and get it into the trunk by herself, and she'd be irritated if you tried to help her. She kept a garden that people slowed down for. Tomatoes, beans, 3 kinds of basil she treated like they were people. She'd been putting up jars every September since Reagan. We have 1 son, Peter. Everybody calls him Pete. He's 38. He's a diesel mechanic at a marina in Elk Rapids, and he's got 2 kids. Junia is 8 and Otto is 5. Pete's wife is Shayla. They'd been married 11 years. She's 36. She was a closer at a title company here in town, which means she ran real estate closings, sat at the table, walked people through the documents, notarized the deeds. Write that down. That is not a coincidence, and it is going to matter. Sailing season on the lakes runs from about the end of March to the middle of January, and I'd been doing 3.5-week rotations for years, 23 days on, 10 off. I left the last week of August, and before I left, Shayla came over with the kids on a Sunday and stood in our kitchen and said, "Arnie, don't even worry about it. I'll check on her. I'm right here. Family takes care of family." And I thanked her. I want to be really clear about that. I thanked that woman. I put my hand on her shoulder, and I said something like times that's a load off my mind, and then I drove up to Sturgeon Bay and got on a boat. Now here's the part that I have not been able to get around, and I need to tell it early because it changes how you hear everything after it. I talked to my wife twice while I was gone. We had a rule. Twice a rotation, because the satellite calling is what it is. Day 8 and day 16. Day 8, she sounded fine. I asked about the garden. She said the tomatoes were coming in heavy. I asked about her hip. She said it was the hip. I asked if Shayla had been by, and she said yes, she'd been by. Day 16, she sounded a little tired. I asked if she was sleeping, and she said not great. And I said, take the Benadryl. And she laughed at me because I say that about everything. And then she said, I love you. Be careful coming down through the Sioux. And I said, always am. That was it. That was the whole call. About 4 minutes. And Shayla was standing in the room. I found that out later. On both calls. Standing right there in my kitchen while my wife talked to me on the landline. I have replayed those 4 minutes more times than I can tell you. And I have listened for it. I have gone through every syllable of that conversation looking for the thing I should have caught. And here's the truth. There was nothing to catch. She sounded fine. That's one reading. And one reading tells you nothing. I want to say something to whoever needs it tonight, and then I'll go on. If you have ever gotten off a phone call with a parent and thought times, well, she sounded fine times, I need you to understand that sounded fine is not information. It is one number on one day, taken by a person who has every reason to want it to be fine. It was fine when I called. It was fine when I called both times. My wife lost 14 pounds during those 2 phone calls. I got in on a Thursday. Late September. One of those days here where the light goes gold about 4:30 and the whole peninsula turns colors. I had the picture in my head the entire drive up from Sturgeon Bay. 10.5 hours of gas station, coffee, and country radio, and the picture was Marley's in the garden in her straw hat, and me hitting the horn twice, and her straightening up slow because of the hip, and waving with a dirty glove. That is not what was there. The driveway was empty, and I noticed that and didn't think about it. Then I got out and looked at the garden. Tomatoes on the ground, split open, going soft, some of them gone. The vines had fallen off the cages on the whole east row, and nobody had tied them back. The basil had bolted, gone tall and woody, and flowered out, which happens in about 10 days if you don't pinch it. And I stood in my own driveway with my bag in my hand, and I knew. Not the details. I didn't know one detail yet, but I stood there and something went through me from the top down, because that woman would not let that garden go for 3 weeks if she had 2 broken arms. She'd have crawled out there. The house had a smell. Not bad, just wrong. Closed up. Like nobody had cracked a window in a month, which in September, in Michigan, with the breeze off West Bay, nobody does that. You leave the windows open in September here. I found her in the back room. She was sitting on the edge of the daybed in her cardigan with her hands folded in her lap, and she was crying with absolutely no sound coming out of her. I said her name. She looked at me and her face did something I have never seen it do, which was try to arrange itself into normal and fail halfway. I sat down next to her and took her hands, and they were cold. Cold like she'd been outside. In a house I later checked, and it was 74 degrees in there. I asked her what happened. She shook her head. I sat with that woman for an hour and 10 minutes holding her hands, and I did not ask again, because I have been married to her for 41 years, and I know that pushing on Marley's bosma closes her like a fist. And after an hour and 10 minutes she said, in a voice I did not recognize, I want to go to bed. It was 20 to 5 in the afternoon, and she walked down that hallway. I'll be honest with you, that's the image I still can't get out. Not anything I found later. That walk down the hallway. She walked like somebody who'd been taken apart piece by piece and put back together slightly wrong. Once she was down, I started looking. The first thing I found was in the mudroom by the back door. A bathroom scale, which does not live in the mudroom. It lives in the hall bathroom, and it has lived there since 1998. And underneath it, a spiral notepad. I picked it up and opened it, and it was a log. Dates down the left side, numbers down the right. 23 days of them, in my wife's handwriting, except her handwriting has gone shaky in a way I had never seen. First entry, the day after I left, 1:36. Last entry, 2 days before I got home, 1:22, 14 pounds. And I stood in my own mudroom holding that notepad, and I want to tell you what happened, because I did not expect it. My hands started going. These hands have been in an engine room in a following sea in November. I have done a cylinder liner change underway. My hands do not shake. They were shaking so bad I had to put the pad down on the dryer, because I knew what I was looking at. That is the one thing in this entire world that I am actually an expert in. That is a IM trend log IM. My wife alone, frightened, losing her mind in that house, had gotten out a scale and a notepad and started writing down a number every day. She was documenting it. She could not stop it. She could not tell anybody. But some part of that woman knew to write it down. And I have thought 1,000 times about where she learned that, and I know where she learned it, and it's from watching her husband do it at a kitchen table for 31 years. I went to the kitchen. The refrigerator had spoiled milk, 4 unopened yogurts 3 weeks past date, a jar of pickles, and half a stick of butter. This is a woman whose freezer is inventoried. She keeps a list taped inside the door. There were 17 jars of tomatoes in that pantry from last September, and she had not opened one. And in the trash, on top, there was a styrofoam clamshell from the place out on M37, with a name written on the lid in marker. Not hers. Shayla? I stood there with that container in my hand for a long time. Then I went out to the garage and got my phone out and opened the camera app. 2 winters ago we had ice damage on the boathouse roof, and the insurance wanted photographs. So I put up 2 cameras, one on the garage eave looking at the drive and the front walk, one on the boathouse looking back at the house. $41 apiece. I have not thought about them in 18 months. There were 900 and some motion clips. I sat on an upturned bucket in my own garage from about 7 that night until almost 2 in the morning, and I watched 23 days. I want to slow this down, because this is where I stopped being a man who was worried and became a man who was building something. Her car, a blue Equinox, showed up the second day I was gone, and it kept showing up. But here's what I noticed on about the 4th clip, and it's the thing that told me this was not a person helping. She parked wrong. Every single time. She pulled up past the walk and swung in at an angle, so the car sat between the front window and the road. Nobody parks like that. There's a whole driveway. She did it every time for 23 days. She was blocking the sight line from the front window to the street. Then the times. 9:40 at night, 6:15 in the morning, 10:50. Not a person stopping by after work. A person coming when nobody's out. Small bags going in, different bags coming out. And then, on day 9, I got to the clip that I had to stop and get up and walk around the garage before I could finish. Delphine Krause, from 2 doors down, she's 80. She's been on this road since 1979. She and Marley's have traded jars for 30 years. Delphine comes up my front walk, carrying a covered pan with both hands. Shayla opens the door, and she does not open it and step back. She fills it. She stands in the middle of that doorway with one hand on the frame, and she talks for about 90 seconds with a tight little smile on her face, and Delphine's shoulders come down, and she nods a couple of times, and she hands over the pan, and she turns around and goes home. You cannot hear a thing. The cameras don't have audio at that distance. You do not need it. Next morning, 6:20 a.m., Shayla comes out the front door carrying that same pan and puts it in the back of the Equinox. My wife never knew that woman came, and it happened 3 more times over 23 days. Delphine twice, a woman I didn't recognize once, and Pastor Weir from the church once, and Weir is a man I have known for 22 years, and he stood on my porch and got turned around and went home. If you have ever wondered how somebody gets isolated in a house on a street full of people who love them, that's how. It isn't a locked door. It's a person standing in a doorway being times pleasant times 4 separate times. Every one of those people went home thinking they'd been told something reasonable. I went back in the house around 2 in the morning and went through the mail. Marley's keeps it in a wooden bowl on the counter by the door. She always has. Bills on the bottom, everything else on top. Underneath the bills there were 4 things. The first was a letter from the credit union confirming a new authorized signer added to our joint checking, dated 19 days earlier. Signer, Shayla Bosma. I do not bank online. I never have. I write checks, and I keep a paper register in the desk. I authorize nothing. The second was from the outfit that handles our annuity, confirming a partial withdrawal request. $31,000, processing, signature received. The third was from a lender I'd never heard of, a home equity line of credit, $55,000, approved and open, against a house I paid off in 2019. And the fourth was a folded sheet of yellow legal paper, and it was not a letter from anybody. It was in Marley's handwriting, the shaky version. It was a list. Everything she had signed, in order, with the dates, the account, the annuity, the line of credit, and the last line on that list was the deed to the house. And underneath that, in letters so small I had to hold it up under the light, she'd written, "I'm sorry." I couldn't figure out how to stop her. I put my head down on my own kitchen table, and I cried the way a man cries when he has just understood something he spent 7 hours trying not to understand. My wife had been terrified. In her own house. For 3 weeks. Of somebody we let in. And I want to tell you what came after the crying, because it came fast, and it was not what I expected. Something cold came up underneath it. Not rage. Rage is hot, and it makes you do things at 3 in the morning that a lawyer has to explain later. This was cold, and it was steady. And it was, I am not exaggerating, Exactly the way I have felt standing in front of a machine that is about to fail, and knowing I have maybe 40 minutes. I am not a violent man. I have never once in 68 years hit another person. But I sat at that table at 3:15 in the morning and I understood completely why some men become one. It was right there. It was available. I didn't take it. What I did instead was get a legal pad and make a list, because that is the only thing I have ever known how to do when something is coming apart. Barney Salt, our attorney, first thing at 8. The credit union the minute it opened. The county sheriff, there's a detective there who does financial crimes against older adults. And she'd given a talk at the senior center that Marley's dragged me to 2 years ago, and I still had her card in the desk drawer because I am a man who keeps cards. And the fourth thing on that list, and it was the one I did not want to write down. Find out what Pete knows. At 5 in the morning I made her breakfast. 2 eggs over easy bacon, toast with the crusts on, and half a grapefruit with sugar on it, which is how she has eaten grapefruit since I met her, and which I have made fun of her for since 1983. I put it on a tray, and carried it back to the bedroom, and set it on her lap. And she looked at that grapefruit, and came apart. Not the silent kind, real ones. The kind that come up out of the floor of a person. 23 days of held breath all at once. And then she told me, I'm going to give you the substance of it and not draw it out because it's ugly. Shayla told her I had a bad heart, that the company physical had turned something up and I'd made her promise not to tell Marley's, and that any real stress could kill me. That's the frame. Everything else hangs off that. Because once you believe that, every single thing you don't tell your husband is an act of love. Then she told her that I'd met somebody up in Duluth, that I wasn't coming back at the end of the season. She showed her something on her phone. Marley's couldn't tell me what. She said she couldn't see it properly. She said Shayla held it and scrolled. And then she started coming at night with papers. And the papers were always to protect Marley's. Protect the house from debts I'd run up. Protect her from being left with nothing. Get things in order so she wouldn't be at anybody's mercy. And Shayla is a closer. That's what I keep coming back to. She sat at a table 5 days a week and walked strangers through documents for a living, in a calm voice, page by page, initial here, sign here. She did to my wife the exact thing she does all day at work. Marley said, I knew it was wrong. And I said, then why? And my wife looked at me and said, because I was going to be alone, Arnie. And she was the only one who was ever going to come. I looked her dead in the eyes, and I told her that every word of it was a lie. My heart's fine. There's nobody in Duluth. There has never been anybody, anywhere, in 41 years. And I had to say it about 4 times before it landed, and that is the part that still gets me, that I had to convince my wife of something she'd have staked her life on 24 days earlier. Then I locked the house. Every door, the chain on the front, a dowel in the slider, and I went around and checked all 11 windows. And I told her, stay in bed, don't answer the door, don't answer the phone. And then I said one more thing, and this turned out to matter more than anything else I did that week. I said, write down everything she said to you, every conversation you can remember, with a date if you can. We're going to need it. She said, Arnie. I said, yeah. And she said, I already did something. Hold on to that. I'm coming back to it. That morning went the way those mornings go, when people decide to be decent. Barney's secretary heard something in my voice at 8 to 10, and had me in front of him at 10. The credit union, the branch manager, is a woman named Nakia Ford, and I have banked with her for 15 years. She read that authorized signer letter and looked up at me and asked me straight out, Arnie, is somebody taking advantage of Marley's? A family member? And I said yes. She froze that account inside 4 minutes, opened a new one in my name only, and then she went and pulled 2 hours of transaction history and printed it and sat down with me at a desk in the lobby and went through it line by line. ATM withdrawals I never made, 4 checks written to cash, 2 transfers into an account that came back to Shayla personally, and 1 stretch of 3 consecutive days in the second week where $9,400 came out in pieces, none of them big enough to trip a report. I asked Nakia what that meant, and she said, it means she knows the number. And I sat there in a lobby chair and understood that this was not the first time my daughter-in-law had done something like this. Barney listened to the whole thing with his eyes shut, which is how he listens, and when I was done he opened them and said, Arnie, this isn't a family disagreement. This is 4 or 5 felonies, and one of them is serious. And then he asked me the question. He said, Do you want this handled inside the family, or do you want her charged? And I thought about my grandchildren, Junia and Otto, who I had not seen in 23 days because of a stomach bug that, it turned out, never existed. And I thought about my wife walking down that hallway at 20 to 5 in the afternoon. And I said, every consequence there is. And Barney said, then we do it correctly. No confrontation. Nobody says a word to her. Give me 48 hours. Shayla called the house 4 times that day. We let every one of them go. And I stood there and listened to the machine pick up, and I heard her voice come out of it, sweet as anything, worried about Marley's, saying she'd swing by tomorrow. And Marley's closed her eyes every single time. Pete got back Friday from a week up in the Huron Mountains with 2 buddies. No service, and he called me from the road absolutely furious, because he had 15 voicemails from his wife saying his mother was having a breakdown, and his father had come home and started screaming at everybody. I told him to come to the house, alone, and not to tell her he was coming. And he did, because he's a man who shows up when his father uses that voice, and he showed up in an hour and 10 minutes with his boots still muddy. And I sat my son down at the kitchen table, and I walked him through it. The camera clips first, then the notepad from the mudroom, then the 4 letters, then the yellow legal paper in his mother's handwriting. I want to slow this down, because this was the worst hour of the whole thing, and it was worse than the garage. He didn't say anything for a long time. He watched Delphine Krause get turned around on our front walk twice, because he made me play it again. And then he got up, and went out the back door, and was sick in the grass by the propane tank. And when he came back in, his face had changed. I don't have a better way to put it. I have known that face since 1987, and it aged, he said. She told me Mom was depressed. She said Mom was embarrassed about it and didn't want anybody around and I should stay out of it. He said, there was $15,000 that showed up in our savings in August. She said it was a commission from a closing where somebody had rolled a fee back. And then he said, very quietly, I knew we were in trouble. And that's the part. That's his piece, and he said it himself, which I respect him for. He said they'd been underwater for 2 years. The truck, a boat they had no business buying, an addition on the back of their house, 4 cards, and she handled all of it. And he had let her handle all of it, because he didn't want to look at it. He said, I didn't want to know, so I didn't ask. And I looked at my son, and I did not say the thing I was thinking, because he was already saying it to himself. Then I asked him for one thing. I said, for one more day, I need you to go home and be normal. Don't warn her. Don't fight with her. Don't pack a bag. And he said, okay. And then he said, what do I tell my kids? And I said, tell them Grandma's been sick and she's getting better, and that next weekend they're coming over here to make biscuits with her. And my 38-year-old son put his arms around me in that kitchen the way he used to when he was about 7 years old, and neither one of us said anything for a while. They picked her up the following Friday afternoon at the title company. Detective Priya Naidu had the warrant, and they did it at the office, and they walked her out through the front in cuffs in front of every person she worked with. I was not there, and I did not ask for that, but I will not sit here and tell you I was sorry about it. Pete filed that same day. He was granted emergency custody that night on the strength of the charges by themselves. The deed came out inside a week. Barney had it voided on duress and undue influence, and it was frankly not close. The annuity withdrawal got clawed back inside 3, and the credit union ate every dollar that had left that checking account, because Nakia Ford personally fought their fraud department for 2 people she'd known 15 years, and I know she did because the fraud manager told me so. Then it took 14 months to get to trial. Now I want to slow all the way down for the last part, because this is the reason I am telling this story at all, and everything up to here has been getting you to it. Her attorney's defense was consent. That's all it ever was, and that's all it ever is in these cases. She signed it. She's an adult. She's not incompetent. There's no medical finding. 2 women had a family financial conversation, and one of them changed her mind afterward. And I sat in that courtroom on the second day and listened to a lawyer describe my wife as a woman who signs things and then regrets them, and I had to hold on to the bench. Barney put the camera footage up first. All 4 of them. Delphine twice, the pastor, the neighbor lady. 4 people. 4 covered dishes. 4 times somebody stood in that doorway and sent them home. The jury watched all 4 without a sound. Then Barney said, Your Honor, we'd like to play States 14. And here's what States 14 was. In the second weekday 12, We worked out later. My wife went into my desk in the spare room and got out my recorder. It's a little handheld thing, digital, about the size of a pack of cards, with one button. I have used it for 31 years to dictate engine notes when my hands were too dirty to write. She has watched me use that thing 1,000 times at that kitchen table. She could not work the voice memo on her phone. She'd told me that once, that she couldn't find it, so she went and got her husband's. And she put it in the pocket of the cardigan she wore every day, and she pressed the button, and she left it running for 4 separate conversations. Nobody knew. Not Shayla, not me, not our son, not the detective, nobody, until she said times. I already did something times in a bedroom at 6 in the morning, and then reached under the mattress. 23 days alone in a house, being told she was losing her mind, and that woman gathered evidence. They played 11 minutes of it in that courtroom. And I want to tell you what it is like to sit on a wooden bench and listen to a recording of your own wife's breathing, because you can hear her breathing. She's got the recorder in her cardigan pocket, so it's right up against her, and you can hear every breath she takes for 11 minutes, and every one of them is short and high up in her chest. And over the top of it, perfectly clear, is Shayla's voice. And it is times kind. That's the thing nobody's ready for. It is the kindest voice in the world. She tells her she won't make it through a winter out here alone. She tells her she can't cook for herself anymore. And I want you to understand, my wife had put up 17 quarts of tomatoes 6 weeks before that. She tells her that when Arnie comes back, he's going to put her somewhere, and then he's going to stop coming. And she says, I'm the only one who's ever going to take care of you. And then she says, so let's just get this one signed, sweetheart, and then I'll make you some soup. And you hear the pen. That's the part. You can hear the pen on the paper. It's about 2 seconds long, and it is the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. I looked over at the jury box during that, and there was a woman on the end, maybe 45, with her hand over her mouth. And I looked at Shayla at the defense table. She had her hands flat in front of her, and she was looking at the wall about 6 feet above the judge, and she did not move at all for 11 minutes. And I have thought about that. She wasn't ashamed. I want to be honest, I don't think that's what I was looking at. I think she was listening to herself doing her job. 7 years. She'll serve at least 4.5. Full restitution with interest, which she will be paying until she is 60, and a no-contact order covering Marley's and both grandchildren permanently. Now let me be fair to her, and it cost me something, and I'm going to do it anyway. Shayla sat at a closing table for 11 years and watched money move. $2, $3, $400,000 a shot, across a table 4 days a week, and her cut of that was a salary that came to about $22 an hour. She watched people who could not read a page of it walk out with houses. And at home she was 2 years into a hole she'd dug and hidden from her own husband, and she was carrying that by herself, and there was nobody she could tell either. And she looked at us, a paid-off house on the peninsula, an annuity nobody had touched in 9 years, 2 old people who don't spend anything and don't take trips and drive a 2011 Silverado. And she did not think times I'm going to steal from them. She thought, that money is coming to Pete anyway. That's the sentence. I'd bet everything I own that's the sentence. She wasn't a thief in her own head. She was accelerating something that was already hers. Marley's told me that at one point Shayla said to her, and this is on the recording, though they didn't play this part, she said, you've got $300,000 sitting there doing absolutely nothing, and my kids are on a payment plan at the dentist. And here's the uncomfortable thing. That was true. Both halves of it were true. We did have it sitting there. Those kids were on a payment plan. She was not wrong about the facts. She was wrong about what the facts entitled her to. And I think that is how almost every one of these starts, not with a person who's evil, but with a person who's times right about something, times and decides that being right is a permission slip. Marley's did not bounce back, and I'm not going to pretend she did. Nightmares for about 7 months. She would not stay in the house alone for the first 10 weeks. She'd go to her sister's in Kingsley if I so much as went to Menard's. She saw a counselor at the senior center in town who specializes in this, once a week, for almost a year, and I drove her every single time and sat in the parking lot with a thermos. The weight came back slow. She was back to 130 by February. She started the garden again the next May. And she's different. I'd be lying to you if I said otherwise. She locks the door in the daytime now, which she never did in 41 years out here. And she has gotten very quiet around people who are a little too generous, a little too fast. Pete lived with us for 3 months while the divorce went through. His old bedroom, the kids in the guest room, Saturday mornings with flour on everything, and Otto hollering. He and I rebuilt the back deck that fall. Took us 6 weekends. We talked about maybe 14 things total the entire time, and every one of them was about joy spacing. And somewhere in the sawdust we got back to, all right, not fixed, all right. So here's what this taught me, and it's the engine room thing, and it took me a year to be able to say it. IM1 reading tells you nothing. You have to be able to see the line. IM1 reading tells you nothing. I talked to my wife twice from that boat, and she sounded fine both times. And that was true. Those were accurate readings. The garden going was 1 reading. 14 pounds was 1 reading. Delphine's pan coming back out the door at 6:20 in the morning was 1 reading, and Delphine times had times it. She had a gut feeling about that pan. She told me so afterward, and she had nowhere to put it. Nobody in this story had bad information. Everybody had times 1 number. And the entire reason I spent 31 years writing things in a book every 4 hours is that no human being alive can hold a trend in their head. You cannot. You will always tell yourself the current reading is normal, because it always is. You have to write it down when nothing is wrong. That's the whole point. The log is worthless unless it was kept on the boring days. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually do, and it takes 90 seconds a week, and I mean this more than anything else I've said tonight. If you've got a parent, or an aunt, or anybody who lives alone, call them directly, not the person who so kindly offered to check in on them, and then write down 2 things, the date, and IM specific concrete detail they told you. IM not how they sounded. A fact. What they ate. Who came by. What they did Tuesday. Keep it in the Notes app, 90 seconds. Because in 8 weeks you will be able to read the line, and I promise you that 8 entries in a row that say sounded fine and contain no facts is itself the most important reading you will ever take. And if you are the one being managed, if somebody in your life has started answering your phone and turning people away at your own front door and telling you things about your husband or your children that don't sit right in your stomach, please find a way to leave 1 note somewhere. It'll be found. Or make 1 call to somebody who lives far away. Adult Protective Services exists in every state, and you can call them about yourself. My wife got her husband's recorder out of a desk drawer, and that is the only reason any of this ended the way it did. And the question I sit with, most weeks still, if somebody asked me what my mother did last Tuesday, could I actually answer, or could I only say she sounded fine? Now I want to hear from you, because people come down differently on this, and I still do too. Comment 1 if you think I did right going quiet for 48 hours and building it properly instead of driving straight over there. Comment 2 if you think I should have gone and gotten her out of my daughter-in-law's reach that first night and let the lawyers sort it out after, because every hour I spent building a case was another hour that woman was free. And comment 3 if you think I never should have left in the first place, that a man who goes away 23 days at a time and hands his wife to somebody else doesn't get to be surprised. Number 3 is the one I go back and forth on at 2 in the morning. If you've got something for me on it, I'll read it. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are right now. It's about 9:45 here, and there's a boat out on the bay with her lights on, and it still gets me that somebody's hearing an old engineer talk while they're eating breakfast on the other side of the world. And here's the one I really want. If you've ever had a bad feeling about somebody who was being times 2 times helpful to a person you love, and you talked yourself out of it, tell me. Tell me what the feeling was and what you did with it. Because Delphine Krauss had that feeling about a covered pan, and she took it home with her, and it sat in her kitchen for 3 weeks. And she has apologized to me for that twice, and I have told her twice that she has nothing to apologize for, and she does not believe me yet. If this one reached you, stay with me, and subscribe. It's an old man on the peninsula with a microphone and a wife out in the tomatoes. There's another one coming. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Traverse City to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.